Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Peoria Life Show. Today, I'll be interviewing Aubrey Barnes, stage name. I'm sorry, how do I pronounce your stage name?
Yeah, so it's Aubrey Barnes, and my stage name is Mr. Aubs.
Mr. Aubs. Thank you. So, my first question of the day is tell us how you got to who you were and where you came from.
Yeah, so if we're talking demographically, so I'm from Rock Island, Illinois. That's where I was born and raised. I live here, or I'm based here currently. And all that, and my work revolves around poetry in the form of writing, as well as performance poetry. I also write books as well. I'm working on my releasing my fourth chat book here shortly, and I work with a lot of schools within the Midwest teaching poetry. So, I mean, when we talk poetry, I got started when I was 11 years old. When I started in junior high and all that, because it was kind of my form of communication. I wasn't a big talker, but I had a lot to say and stuff like that. So, poetry is kind of my go-to. So I started poetry in junior high and wrote all throughout high school, and was so infatuated with the art that I majored in creative writing my freshman year of college, but then switched over to education my second year, and I have my degree in educational studies now. But I'm beginning my master's currently in creative writing right now.
Oh,
Yeah. So that's how I got started, and then with the performance art part, I was introduced to poetry as a performance art when I was 23. I'm 33 now, so it was about 10 years ago. And I was introduced to it by a youth group that did poetry and stuff like that. And ever since I was introduced to it, it was almost like second nature that it was art that I kind of like got into since I was already used to writing poetry. So yeah, I've been doing it for about 10 years, performance wise and professionally, but I've been writing for the last, yeah, 22 years.
oh wow. So, what made you think that you fell in love with poetry in the first place?
Yeah. I think in junior high and high school, it was just a form of expression, that was
Oh,
different than like music. And it felt like a lot more like it was a lot more accessible, because writing poetry just takes you writing poetry, whether it's on paper, whether it's on napkins, notebooks, backup notebooks, it's easily accessible. So I think those two things made it appealing to me. And it got to a place. I remember when I was in high school is when I started really showing people my poetry, to the point where I'd write poems for girlfriends in high school, for
oh.
for for um, for family members. And I wasn't really cognizant of it then, but kind of like the impact I think of just seeing how my words impacted people was was something that like now being adult kind of like showed me is like that it was something that I was like meant to do, just seeing how it impacted people in the world in this space and time. So that's what kind of keeps it going now to this day, just kind of seeing how my words have impacts with people, and how like pretty much there my thoughts have a resonance with people too.
So I can relate to that. Originally, when I was in college, I was a zoology major, but then I switched to creative writing. So, like a lot of the people I read in college really inspired me to become a writer. Like
Mm,
I focus in prose and poetry. So, next
nice.
question: can you share a pivotal moment in your career that shaped your artistic journey?
Yeah. Ooh. You know what? I would say back in 2020 when we're all kind of in our little quarantine
Yeah.
era and all that. I remember I had this moment. Um, I had this moment uh, during my creative process and all that where I realized, because, and again, mind you, I grow up kind of like a with people pleaser syndrome, and I think that kind of
Oh.
like I think that some kind of show sometimes shows through your work, showed through my work through like how quote unquote safe I kind of played it as a creative. But I had this realization that like people are gonna like have gonna be critical of you no matter what you do. I could like write the most neutral, said diplomatic, like quote unquote peaceful poem more so, non-interrogative poem, and there's still going to be 500,000 people who have a problem with it. So for me, I have this realization that like I shouldn't make my work in terms of like trying to people please, because that's impossible. Someone's always going to be upset, someone's always going to be on their feelings, someone's always going to have some criticism. So why not just create what I want and not care, and I think that was a breaking point in my creative journey, because it gave me a freedom where I just don't care. It's not that I don't care. Like I care about humans deeply. I care about people deeply, but I don't care about coddling people's feelings when it comes to what I write, because it's a true narrative. It's a narrative that's honest, and it may be raw, but I'd rather at the end of the day I tell people this, like a recent thing I've always told myself is like all I got is my honesty. If people have an issue with honesty, that has nothing to do with me. It has all the more to do with the person. So that was a really big breaking point in my creative career, because it taught me to be free in my creativity, talk about whatever I want, and know that like at the core of it, I'm being me.
So my next question: who are some of your biggest influences in poetry and spoken word?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So when we think about poetry, when I think about poetry, my influences there I would say are Gil Scott Heron, who people call like the grandfather of rap. He's from Chicago, Illinois, and all that. He would be one. James Baldwin for sure. He was just a genius writer and just a genius thinker as well. Um, those two are the ones that stick out to me poetry wise. When it comes to spoken word, I'd have to give a shout out to my brother in poetry and a past mentor and coach, Black Chakra, who's one of the most decorated slam poets like in the U.S. Amazing, amazing poet. I would say him for sure. Propaganda is another poet who really influenced a lot of my work and kind of shaped me as a creative. So those two poets, spoken word wise, are the ones I can think of, and writing wise as well. So those are my influences from the world of poetry.
So I'm gonna go a little bit off the rails. So what made you fall in love with them?
With the poets,
Yes.
yeah, I would say when I think about Gil Scott Heron, they're all for different reasons, right? So Gil Scott Heron, um, I think his honesty, like his truth telling and the wisdom that he kind of employed through his writing, really influenced me. Being someone who like kind of like did art in the way that he did, that was honest, and that kind of spoke truth in a very unique way and wasn't afraid to speak truth. That was really appealing to me. Now, James Baldwin, just his genius behind his writing. James Baldwin is one of the greatest thinkers, I think, still to this day and time. I can't think of any greater thinker from a literary perspective and just from an intellectual perspective of James Baldwin, because he was a person who like his writing didn't take sides. When you think about, he didn't take political sides. He didn't take a side of like Democrat, Republican. He was just a person who spoke truth and like pointed out flaws and taught us how to be more human. And like that was like one of the biggest draws for me with James Baldwin, just like his prolificness and how he spoke, but also in like how he conveyed truth in such a different way. Amazing. Black Chakra, he just he has the most strongest conviction as a poet. Like his energy is just unmatched. Like amazing energy, amazing writer, and just the way he allows his mind to just like the place he allows his mind to go as a creative really drew me. And Lash Propaganda, um, his raw honesty with himself and how he allows his honesty with himself to kind of be a reflection to us. Honestly, just the fact he takes stories about his life and what he sees in himself and around him, and allows us to kind of be welcome to that world as well, and kind of seeing ourselves in this world. So those are kind of bits and pieces that like influence me about each poet, that I kind of add to myself as a creative now.
Hmm. So now my next question. So, in regards to how what inspired you to become a teacher?
Yeah, so being an educator, that's been something that I've wanted to do way before I was even wanted to be like a creative per se.
Oh,
Like I've wanted to be a teacher since I was in third grade, you know. So I tell people like I feel like that's something that the universe has always had for me. And like with poetry, I'm as a poet, I'm an educator when I'm a poet too. It's just I'm educating with the sense of poeticness, you know. So it was just I think it just started as off as just one of those things I wanted to do, but just now being 33 and kind of like going through all these experiences that I've had, like I've been an educator for 10 years, and when I say educator, I mean everything from being a para educator, from a teaching assistant to a fourth grade teacher to a junior high teacher, like all that's educator. I don't think there's any hierarchy of like what that is, but that's besides the point. But kind of going through all these experiences, I realized that like me being an educator is important because and I don't say this in any kind of like egocentric sense, but there's not a lot of educators like myself. There is educators like myself, but like they come very few and far between, you know, ones who like don't really care to abide by like the system. And when I say the system, like what like for me, like as an educator, I don't care about, you know, state standardized testing. I
hmm.
don't think that measures a kid's worth, measures a kid's intelligence. I don't care about, you know, how we practice education in the sense of like, as an educator, like if I had a student come in with like noticeable anxiety, stress, anger, I want to talk about that, and I don't care about math. Math can wait. We can talk about math any other day, but like at the end of the day, if I'm an educator, I'm teaching you about life. And like in this moment, if I'm talking to you about your anxiety and depression, I'm teaching you how to handle life, and that's way more important to me than like what we create education to be. And like, there's not a lot of educators like that. So for me, though I don't work in the schools as a teacher in a traditional sense, that I don't think I ever will, because I have my own system in which I created. I realized that my role as an educator is still very important because of my heart for education and kind of my philosophy behind education and how I'm really I really put the student first before what I need to do for the student. You know, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, when I used to work as a substitute teacher, and like things that were being done were so like I kid you not about this. My very first day was at when I was did my substitute teaching job. One of my students actually said that I was teaching the class better than his real teacher.
Mm,
Like what I was telling the students to do is just read the book or the notes. Just read it to yourself because when you read something out loud, this is something my one of my old college professors used to tell me that your brain responds differently for when you read something in your head versus when you read it in your mind. I mean, no, sorry, you read something out loud versus when you read it in your
yeah.
mind.
Yep. No, absolutely. And the fact that you even like employed that to students, like that just shows like your mind works different than other educators who are so stuck on like how things should be as opposed to like being flexible to like how things can be, you know. So that's dope. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Wow.
So because that also shows something that our education system is broken. That basically we're actually achieving results, yet we're basically the more outlandish people, if so to speak.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and I say this a lot, and people think it's like super controversial or like I shouldn't say it, but like our education system is falling apart. It's literally like a house that like the floors crumbling, the foundations are kind of like flimsy, the roof isn't there, like it's all falling apart. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with Minnie Jean Brown, but she was one of the first. She was part of the Little Rock Nine, one of the first that group of kids who were like first to go into an integrated school back in like the 19 like I forget what year and all that. I'm not even going to try to quote myself, but she spoke at our in our town
Oh,
about a month and a half ago, and someone asked her about the state of education, and she said like, and this again coming from somebody who's been around integrated education from the beginning. You know, she's an older elder now, but she said like education's failing. She said it herself. You know, and someone who's been there for years, you know, who's traveled all over the country, all over the world, teaching about education, for someone to say that education in the US is failing, that's something that, you know, we should take serious. And for me, like with that known, it's like, what do we do after? Like if this thing's falling apart, what house do we build up to kind of take over what's being built? You know?
So I'm going to change the subject a little bit in regards to your creative process. So,
Yeah.
how do you approach writing a new poem? Do you have a specific process?
You know, the process I'd say as of lately, I'm a big observer. Like I'm a big listener. I'm more like as ironic as it is being a performance poet. I'm way more of a listener than a talker. So like I'm always observing like the world around me, whether it be like something my student said to me or a random conversation I had with a gentleman in the locker room at the gym or somebody who I passed at an airport. Like I'm always listening for the next poem, you know, or looking for the next poem and all that. So like for me, like that's where my writing process starts. Like if I see something that could be a poem, like maybe I see some kids walking home, there's a poem there. So then I kind of just sit down and kind of like write the story and kind of let myself. I believe that art should be worked in uncertainty, you know, like so whenever I write, I don't know where I'm going. I just know that I'm writing a story and I let that story kind of unveil itself slowly. So that's what the process always looks like. How it kind of is approached is always different. Like sometimes maybe I'll write maybe just 4 lines that day and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Maybe some days I'll write 16 lines and then I feel encouraged to write another 16 lines, look over those lines and maybe they don't work. And I'm like editing. It always looks different, but I'm always inspired by like what I'm hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, tasting, and observing around the world and writing a story off that, you know, because there's always poems around us. It's just us being aware enough to like pick them up.
No, actually, that's some way similar to my process. Like observe things and I think about things, just
Mm-hmm.
quietly. Like I'm like you. I am also more of a thinker and listener than a talker. But I just yeah, just observing nature, just observing
Mm-hmm.
people, places, things. It just makes you think.
Yeah, I think it's important because I think sometimes, like as poets, we get stuck in like what we think we want to write, and then that's where writer's block comes because we're just making it about ourselves as opposed to being like, okay, I'm gonna let the story unveil itself, and
Oh.
I'm just gonna write, you know. So it kind of takes a sense of us letting go, in my opinion, you know.
That that is something I really need to think about. So, spoken word has a unique performance element. How do you balance writing for the page versus the stage?
Yeah. So it's funny because like that, yeah, that's a good question. Because whenever I write poems on the page, I write them as if they're going to be read. You know, I write in
That
like
makes sense.
yeah, because for me, I'm like if I'm going to make these publications, if these are going to be read at some point, like I don't want to write it as if I'm going to perform it. I'm going to write it and kind of make it what it'd be like if somebody's reading it. But performance wise, um, obviously, it's a lot more. There's a lot more theatrics to it, as I call it. You know, because performance poetry, spoken word poetry, is theatrical. Because again, like if I'm just reading a poem to you in this regular voice and this regular tone, and it stays the same, like you're gonna get something out of it. Like you're probably gonna even resonate with it. But when I add my theatrics to it and like find certain parts where my inflection's different in these lines, where it's different in these lines, where some parts I'm loud, some parts are quiet, some parts I speed up, some parts I slow down, and I'm kind of really getting into the said character of my poem. It's a lot more appealing. Like you have no choice but to be like pulled in because I'm performing the poem, you know. So for me, like from taking the poem from page to stage, it's all about kind of like finding the different tones, the different emotions, and really kind of tapping into the feeling that I felt when I was writing it, you know, and really kind of like allowing those myself to embody all those things when I perform and like I'm being a character. Though I'm not being a character, but I'm being a character because like I'm living in the skin of my poem, you know. So when it comes to performance wise, it's all about really kind of integrating your poem into your body and into your voice and learning how that's employed to your audience.
Hmm. That's understandable. Truth. So, How did you first come up with the idea for Young Lions Roar?
Yeah, so I actually came up with the idea of it after I quit my junior high teaching job in the middle of the semester 3 years ago, and I quit just because there was a lot of things that I was disagreeing with the school that
Mm.
I worked with, and it had just had the capacity to really affect me. So I quit, but I realized that like education is my thing. Like, even though I quit the school and made the decision to not really work in schools, even though I did accept a teaching job after and quit that one too. I realized that like because education was in my core, I could make whatever I want, and I don't really need these entities and all that to like make what I want. So the day I quit, I connected with one of my good friends who wanted to support me in what I was doing education wise, and like I came up with this program called Young Lions Roar, which came off an idea from like a open mic that I run in the community called Roaring Rhetoric, which is an open mic for the
Oh.
community. Yeah, I've been running that for about 10 years. So like just kind of having that aspect already with like a lion, and a lion has always kind of been appealing to me with like how a lion uses its voice, you know. So for me, Young Lions Roar just kind of like was an easy kind of go to and all that. So I created the whole blueprint of what that looked like, what that could be like for students, and then literally made it a thing with the help of the community. You know, our first after school program was in a collaboration with a good friend of mine named Rob McCoy, who's a pastor for a downtown church in Rock Island, and he offered his space for us to like do after school programming, and he even went the lengths to like look for funding for us. You know, he took all these sacrifices to be able to make this thing happen for kids, and it just became a thing. You know, where we just started getting kids who were interested in poetry. The first year was amazing. We had amazing poets, and it really kind of showed me that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. You know, so ever since then I've just stuck with it and kind of created poetry programming for kids in junior high, elementary to high school, and just giving it a space to create. You know, that's my biggest thing: giving kids a space to create.
So, how do you see poetry as a tool for youth empowerment?
Um, it teaches students how to use their voice. You know, at the end of the day, like because again, like I'm not one of those people who has this aspiration to make every student a poet. Because like there might not be students who want to be poets. You know, there might be students who are just there to just hang out because that's kids. You know, and for me, I've accepted that. But for me, I'm like, at the end of the day, um, poetry shows you how to use your voice. It gives you space to use your voice. You know, where like if you can share a poem in front of your peers, in front of adults, in front of your community, how much more can you speak up for yourself in front of your peers and adults and the community? You've already done it through poetry, you know. So for me, it gives students a place to empower themselves through their voice, but also like as of lately, like I realize that it gives them a space to like empower themselves through like taking control of their own mental wellness. Because like mental health is like these junior high kids, and unfortunately, ever since COVID, like we see high school students who are struggling with their mental health, and they come to school angry, they come to school disrespectful, they come to school not wanting to do anything, roam the halls because they're mentally broken. And that's trickled down now with like eighth graders and seventh graders, where eighth graders, they don't give a dang. They're doing the same things. They're disrespecting teachers. They're disrespecting themselves. They're getting into fights. They're skipping school. They're not going to class because their mental's not right. And unfortunately, we're starting to see that trickle down to seventh grade. And unfortunately, you know, it's one of those things where like it's gonna infiltrate elementary school, where like these kids are gonna just not care because like of how the system is, you know. So for me, poetry is one of those things where like even just take poetry out of it, writing is one of those things that teaches you how to connect with yourself and how to really like ask yourself, okay, what's going on with me? Like, why the heck am I this way? Why the heck am I getting upset? Why the heck am I like, you know, it brings you to a place of inner dialogue, you know. So for me, there's empowerment in that, because when you can like take control of your mental wellness and understand yourself and understand why you're certain ways, you learn to kind of like take control of those things going on inside of you, and that's empowerment, because once you're better, the world around you gets better and stuff like that. So yeah.
So this is something I have. You made me think about stuff. In some ways, the current like Generation Alpha and the Zoomers and Generation Alpha, like in some ways they were born after the internet was fully accepted in society. Oh, and one thing is that because of COVID, like really damaged their mental health and their emotional well being. Not only that, like say sometimes they have to be online, and being online all the time is not a healthy outlet because you're dealing with not exactly the best trends, especially on TikTok. They're maybe engaging with the only people without actually engaging with each other authentically.
hmm Yeah, kids have terrible role models. It's hard to say, but like a lot of these kids, like you said, like 90% of the time in their life, they're on TikTok, they're on Snapchat, mainly TikTok, and like on TikTok, like they're and YouTube too. They're following these adults who are like our age. I don't know your age, but like they're around our age, maybe a little younger than us, who literally use their platform to just do a lot of nonsense, and these kids look at that and they aspire to be that. And it's like they're kind of seeing someone who's making a lifestyle off of nonsense. So for them, they're like, I can make a lifestyle off of nonsense, but they don't realize like they're 15 and 16 and still developing. So like they begin their nonsense through like, oh, I'm not going to go to school, or I'm not going to go to class, and all this and the other, not realizing like you're setting yourself up. And again, like school's not the end all tell all. If you don't go to school, find a trade, find something that you can make a business out of. But even then, you need a sense of sitting down and learning. You can't not learn something. But when you got terrible role models who just use their platforms for nonsense, it only makes sense for and the nonsense is getting them these imaginary digital numbers of like views and all that, which a lot of these kids find pride in. When you mix all those together, you have like it makes sense that like our kids kind of like fall into all these traps and frustrations and anger and not wanting to go to school and all that because their role models are terrible role models.
In some ways, the process is similar to the broken generation of World War One. Like they were the
hmm
first generation to experience like post traumatic stress because World War One was such a thing of horror for the world. No one knew how to respond. In some ways, COVID, like the chaos around the first Trump presidency, basically as well as the Biden presidency, and now set up mental mood for these kids. Also, like you have an unstable world, and during COVID because they weren't able to engage with anybody, um, you
Yeah.
basically these kids have known nothing but chaos and just like they don't know what it was like well before things were quote unquote normal. Never like as a millennial, like we grew up seeing 9/11 happen, the Bush years, the war on terror, and then the recession. Like each generation has their own thing confrontation, but with a but this generation things are different. Like we grew up, we saw the internet grow up, like fester
hmm
into its own, but we kind of know how to function without it. Like
Yeah.
we were writing cursive, we were using the Oregon Trail. I don't know if you remember
hmm
that. So before shooting drills in schools, so we were kind of. I'm 35. If you ever wonder,
Okay,
so
so we're on the same age then.
correction. I'm only gonna be 35 next week. So
Okay.
we're in the same. We're both older millennials, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah. It's I never know what we are. Like, is that what it is? Like
Millenn
33
Yeah,
and 35. It's like millennials.
like 85 is the oldest millennials, I think. So and then anything up to 1994.
Mm. Okay. So yeah, yeah. Always. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we're in that space of millennials. And like you said, like we grew up in a space where like I have a phone, but I can leave my phone at home. I don't need it. Like, and I'll be okay with that. I can like leave my phone in the car and I'm okay with that because I know how to connect with life without it because we grew up connected with life without it. But with these kids now, they can't even fathom leaving the home without their phone. I had a student who had almost like this meltdown moment because they didn't have their phone. It's just like, bro, like you got humans around you that you can talk to. But when you don't grow up with that, it's like it's hard to fathom those worlds, so they're kind of stuck in this world that is very unique and different from ours, like you said.
Yeah, like in some ways, it's kind of like how you've ever read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, like how human
Mm,
beings like are so overstimulated, like they start developing, like having lacking empathy, like they're not even reading books or engaging the world in ways they should.
mm. Yeah, yeah, and that's it right there. That's so, and it's crazy when you think about it because like right now in the U.S., um, one of the most lowest scoring subjects is reading and writing. And it's because like yeah, kids are texting, kids are sending Snapchat messages, but that's very different from like actually sitting down and writing. Because like a lot of these kids, they're on Snapchat and they're not even spelling words right. I know that because I work with these kids. But like a lot of these kids also aren't reading, and when you kind of couple that with like this short attention span culture that we have, and like some people our age have it too, where like people have like our brains are because we like subject our brains to so much nonsense. We can't. Our attention spans are super just shot. Like we can't sit down and read a book, which is like weird, But with kids, all the more their attention spans like maybe 30 to 90 seconds. You know,
So, what are some of the most memorable moments you had working with young poets?
man, I'd say my first year starting Young Lions Roar was probably the most memorable. And I'm grateful for it because like it really set the bar of like what poetry education can kind of look like. But the students I had maybe like one, two, three, four, five consistent students for the whole year. But those students who were consistent, they were all about poetry. Like when we got together after school, they were writing, they were creating, they were performing, they were sharing their work, and they were doing it on their own accord too. They'd come to poetry after school programming with their own poems that they wrote at home and stuff like that. And for me to be able to like lead such a passionate group of students for the first time of ever doing programming, though it was only five students, like I don't get caught up in numbers. I know people are like, oh well, you could have more students than that. Numbers don't matter to me because like it's all about the quality. Like if I have five students and I'm pouring into them and they're receiving the work, I'd rather work with those five students than 50 students who don't give a care. Like I don't want to take those students. Give me the five students. So the fact that I had five students who were like really committed to their work and really trusted me with leading them in this creative process of poetry, that was like probably the most amazing experience I'd ever have because like I was able to like create a space for these students who really cared about poetry, and didn't need a lot of push. They just wanted a space. So that was like probably the most like impactful part of my career so far.
So, so we're gonna switch back to spoken word and your performance. So, how do you prepare for a live spoken word performance?
Oh, a lot of practice. Like a lot of practice. Like I spent a lot of times in my parents' garage utilizing it to rehearse poems to myself for an hour. So for me, like it's a lot because again, like when you're committing your poems to memory, um, it's a practice of like you got to get it there in your head, and then after it's like comfortably there in your head, it's like second nature to perform it. But like preparing for it is like I'm not only like reciting my poems, but I'm also like I'm practicing how I would say them in front of people. I'm putting my emotion into it. Some pieces like I have to be careful with because like they're so emotional where like I can feel that emotion for the day. So if it's a piece that's like if I'm performing a piece about my brother who committed suicide 3 years ago, that's something that like I got to prepare myself for. I can't really like nonchalantly rehearse that one, so I got to give myself a special time and space to like ready myself for those emotions. So for me, that performance part is literally just like literally practicing every day, whether it's at nighttime, whether it's during daytime, and really giving myself the time to make myself acquainted with my poem, where I can like have it appear to the point where I don't even have to I don't have to remember it. It's already there, and I'm just given the narrative. You know.
So, do you have a favorite piece you have performed, whether it's spoken word or poetry, and what makes it special to you?
Yeah, that answer that the answer that's always changing. I'd say in the present moment, dang, there's a lot. I'd say my recent piece, Villains, is one that I enjoy. I've only performed it once since I've had it, but um I enjoy that piece because it's pretty much like one of those pieces where I'm looking at myself and looking at like myself from like a psychoanalytical perspective and just kind of like being honest about my flaws as a person and um, grieving those moments where I did what I was supposed to do, you know, and like kind of thinking about those times where I was like outside of myself. And I think that poem was really important because again, like being able to like share poems that are vulnerable and talking about my flaws and shortcomings and kind of reflecting that to an audience. It's scary because you never know how people are going to judge you after. Like people are probably gonna be like, oh, this guy's a POS or like this guy's a terrible human. And like if somebody walks away with that, that's okay. But also like being able to share those pieces, it connects people it connects me with people in such a unique way where like people don't feel alone. Like oh, I have a lot of flaws and shortcomings too. And now that you share yours, I don't feel as ostracized or shamed, you know? So I'd say Villains is the one I resonate with the most as of lately because of that.
So, what's the next question? Um, how do you engage an audience and bring them into your world when performing?
Um, Personal stories.
Oh,
You know, I've realized that being the writer that I am, um, I'm I'm very about kind of like the writing process of making my work like as creative and prolific as I can. But I've learned that like sometimes, most of the time, like with how I write, people say it kind of goes over head sometimes. But with that said, I've realized that like at the end of the day, people aren't going to understand the the prolificness of my work. They're just not there. They're not a creative, you know, and that's okay. But the thing that people are going to connect with the most is my personal stories and how my personal stories is connected with their world. So I've learned to connect with my audience with like sharing stories that are personal, that they can understand, that they can comprehend, and hopefully connect to their world as well. So yeah, that's how I kind of like engage my audience.
so one other thing. So what's the other? Let me get my thoughts together. My thoughts together. So where do you think see the spoken word movement going to in a few years or evolving?
Well, I mean, the fact that it's now, the fact that spoken word poetry now is like just it was just made a Grammy nominated art form. You know,
Oh,
just
when was this?
about 2 years ago now, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. So for me, I think it's one of those things where we're going to see a lot more people because of that. Because you'll have people like, unfortunately, who kind of go towards art forms for the sake of like how it makes them famous and all that. Which I mean, if that's your thing, that's good. But I don't think that should be the purpose of art. You know, just being famous. Like, I think that kind of dilutes the art. But I think with that said, we'll see an influx of people who gravitate towards this art, um, who are doing it just because, like I said, it's just one of those things where like it gets them recognized as opposed to like being about the art. So but the fact that again, like the fact that it's a Grammy nominated art form, like now I think that like that kind of like will lead people to like audience members more so to gravitate more towards the art as like audience members the same way they would for a concert and stuff. So I think in the next few years we'll see a lot more people gravitate towards that art as audience members, and like I said, you'll have people who gravitate towards the art as those who are. I mean, we'll say vultures, and I don't mean vultures in the sense of like if that having like ethnic look. I think vultures can look like whatever, but like you'll have people who utilize the art just to be famous, as opposed to being about the craft, being about the conviction of the art,
Or
being about
inspiring
like
other people.
you said what?
Or inspiring other people.
Yeah, exactly. And like as unfortunate as it is, I think like um you'll find people though in that art form too that like are really about the art, who will have a lot more of a being drawn to because now like the art's being more sought after, so you'll see an influx of people for sure.
So one thing I could also see happening potentially is I can't believe I'm laughing at this, is seeing people make idiots themselves on stage, so we can all so in that way that gives us the excuse for all of us to laugh at them.
Hmm. Yeah, and you know what? There's like it's funny because like I realize that like with poetry, as vulnerable of as art as it is, as truth telling of art as it is, um, there's a space for it being funny. Like there's actually there's a poet who I did a poetry slam against about 2 weeks ago in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he had a hilarious poem that had the whole room laughing. And for me, I was like, wow, like this guy is gonna win this round because he was able to take this poem and collectively make us all feel this the same feeling, which is laughter. Laughter's not a feeling, but you know what I'm saying. So like I think like there's a fine line between that though and what you're kind of talking about with like people who kind of just use it to be gimmicky. I don't like that. Just to kind of make yourself like a fool on stage just because again like I think because of this world of social media and because everything's about viral moments, which I hate. I'll put that
Yeah.
out. I think that's disgusting. But you'll have people who will literally just like pimp art forms just for the sake of like, oh, I'm going to do something super gimmicky because my followers are going to like this, and I have 3 million followers. I'm trying to make a viral moment. I'm like, well, you just literally disrespected the art and showed yourself not for the art form. So that's what I don't appreciate. Like I can appreciate laughter if that laughter is still crafted in the sense of like I'm worried about how I create this piece of art and how it resonates with people, but I want to make them laugh. I can rock with that. I just don't like the gimmicky stuff.
So how do you think, in regards to continuing this conversation, how do you think social media has helped or hurt the art form of poetry and spoken word?
So I'll start with help before I get into like my criticalness because I don't want to seem like the old man hating on everything. But I'd say social media it helped connect people. I mean, back in 2020 when we were all shut down in quarantine, virtual open mics took place. There are people who are having virtual open mics on Instagram where like literally you could be in 8 open mics within a 2 hour time frame in like 3 different countries and 5 different states. You know, and the fact that you could do that, you could connect with people who you wouldn't connect with um, unless that was available. So for me, social media create social media has helped creators a lot because it's connected us to a world that we wouldn't have been connected to otherwise. I have like a lot of great friends who are big fans of my poetry and art who don't even live in this country, who I've never even met. You know, that wouldn't have happened if social media wasn't a thing. So that's the beauty of it. And like I literally had a friend come here last week for to teach a poetry class here for me and to do a poetry open mic. And I met this friend back in 2020. He's in Nashville, Tennessee, but I met him through social media. And now we're like the best of friends. And that friendship wouldn't have happened if social media wasn't there. So, like, social media has done a lot of great things for a community and for humans, for creatives. So, I want to start off with that. But I think it's hurt also where, like, people, the quality of art isn't cared for. Like people don't care about the quality of art on social media. Like the fact that like I can record a poem right now in this format and make a video of it for 20 seconds, and people will gravitate towards that, and people will like jump towards that. It shows that like people don't care about the quality. For me, like a lot, even the fact that like creatives literally do workshops on like, okay, this is how you make something super fast for your audience because your audience doesn't have a good attention span, so you need to cater to that. So it's like, I think that's bogus. Challenge your audience. If they don't got an attention span, if they only got attention spans for 30 seconds, that's weak. Like work on your attention span. Like I'm not here to cater to your laziness or here to cater to your slothness for lack of a better term. Like you should be challenged by creativity. I'm challenged by creativity. You know, so for me, the fact that like social media has kind of made it where like creatives don't challenge their audience, but they most so cater to them by being gimmicky, by doing a whole bunch of like funny, anticky stuff, and kind of like dilute the quality of art. That's something that like I can never get behind, because art calls to create art and to cultivate art calls for your full effort, mind, and attention. If you're not giving your art your full effort, mind, and attention, you're just doing it to like be famous. Cool, you'll make a lot of money. Cool, you'll probably be able to buy a mansion. But like at the end of the day, it's like, what is it to gain the world and lose your soul? I'm not losing my soul for a bunch of
Trends.
yeah. No, that's not what it's about. You know.
So I think we're getting close to the end of our interview. So I want to add some personal reflection and legacy. If you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would you be?
Oh, well, what would my advice be to my younger self?
Yes.
Don't care about people's opinions. Do what you want. Literally, that's what I would say.
And
Like,
so,
don't care. Like, don't care about don't give any mind to the person who says you're white. Don't give any mind to the person who says you're gay when you're not either or, because they're trying to like, because they're not familiar with like your differentness. Like for me, I've realized that like as a human being, I'm very different from a lot of people, and like that used to make me like depressed. That used to make me feel very isolated and all that. But I'm like, I don't care. The fact that I'm different is good. The fact that I'm different, I can make things that are different that people gravitate towards. So for me, I think I would just tell my younger self like, don't pay no mind to people who like are just there to criticize you. They're going to be there forever. I literally have people here to stay who criticize me. I just don't hear about it because they don't bring it up to me. But that's okay. I don't care because I'm free and I'm able to create the way that I want to. I'm able to be who I want to. I'm able to do what I want to. That's all that matters. People's opinions, whatever. Like I'm gonna forget about that 2 days from now because I have ADHD and I forget a
so
lot of stuff. You
what do you
know.
hope that people take away from your poetry?
Um. hmm. I'd say that it's first and foremost that it's okay to be human. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to like be yourself. But what is not okay is to like um, to make excuses for the parts of you that are destructive, whether it's to yourself, whether it's to your neighbor, whether it's to your family, your friends, your loved ones. That's the thing that's not okay. So I hope my work always reflects like, hey, like it's okay to be human, but we need to grow. Like if you're someone who's bitter and you're angry about life and your anger shows through how you treat people, okay, that's a human thing. That's okay, but change yourself. Do the work. Don't just be here and just say like, oh, this is me. No, while we're human beings on this earth, we all have to like do our work and transform ourselves for the betterment of ourselves and for others. And it's hard work. I understand, it's hard work to change yourself, but there ain't no human on this earth who's exempt from doing self work. So that's what I think I would like lead people to like pull from my work, that like you can be human, but don't stay being a terrible human. Like do some work and learn how to grow and be more of a loving human being. Because at the end of the day, when everything's said and done, like we're here to experience love and to give love, and you got to adjust yourself to that.
So, how would you want to be remembered as a poet and mentor?
As someone who just took risks, who wasn't afraid to be themselves, regardless of like what criticism I got. I want to just be remembered like that. That I just if people for because at some point, 100 years from now, 50 years from now, people are going to forget my poems. There's probably not even going to be people who know that I wrote books. There's probably not even going to be anybody there who could quote anything that I wrote, and I'm okay with that. Poetry is just cool while I'm here and I'm alive. I'm not going to care about my poetry when I'm dead. I'm not going to care. So at the end of the day, I want people to like remember me as someone who like didn't confine themselves to a box and wasn't afraid to be themselves, and wasn't afraid to like do what they want, and hopefully empower other people to do that. Because again, we're gonna be dead one day. Why spend your life just doing a whole bunch of stuff you don't like? Do stuff that you love. We're gonna die. So so do what you love because you're gonna die. That's the end of the chapter.
Okay, that's deep. So, since we're going towards the end of the audience, so what's next for you? Like, what are your upcoming projects and performances that we should look out for?
Yeah, so I'm publishing my fourth poetry book called "I Took the Wrong Path," which is coming out April 11th of this next month, and it's a poetry book about just my battles with like grief, of losing my brother to suicide, and how like I've made a lot of messed up decisions in grief. I've made a lot of messed up decisions that hurt myself, that hurt others, whether it was like lying to people, being disloyal to people, being angry, being at rage, you know, um, but I learned from it, so that's my next poetry book coming out April 11th. So that's the next thing. And then I'm doing a little book tour and all that. And that'll kind of be on my social medias, mainly Instagram, Mr. Aubs, Mister Aubs. You can find the tour dates for that and all that when I kind of get to that process. So those are things that are next, and I'm gonna keep teaching poetry.
So, one final question before we close the interview. Where did you get the pen name Mr. Obbs from?
Um, so I'm really inspired by Mr. Rogers. I think
Uh,
like I think as an educator and a human, he was the most coolest dude ever. Like I don't know if you ever watch any of his documentary. Well, he has one documentary, and then he has one movie that Tom Hanks. I think it was Tom Hanks.
yes.
Yeah, that he acted in, and like I was just really like, because he knew how to connect people and speak to people on such a human level. So for me, being an educator, it just made sense to like put the Mister before an A's because before anything, I'm an educator. It used to be Aubs when I was just focused on art, but like Mister is kind of like that reminder that like like I'm an educator. I'm here to educate through my poetry, through all the things. So that's how Mister Aubs kind of came to be.
So, thank you for your today, Mr. Barnes. So, thank you for the interview, and thank you for